Hello and welcome to One Trek Mind with me, Michael.
And me, Raptor.
And today we're going to be doing a different kind of video entirely. We're going to be discussing we're going to be debating the ethics of the very controversial Tuvix situation, where one of us will take the opposing side. In reality, we both agree on how this situation should have been handled, which we'll get into at the end of this debate.
Yes.
But for now, I will be representing my client, Tuvix, and Fletcher will be representing his clients, Tuvok and Neelix, or Janeway if you prefer.
Yes, in theory, what we're doing is we're putting Captain Janeway on the stand, as it were, for her actions in the episode. And I am going to be defending her actions, and Michael is going to be defending the opposite. But I think it's a good place to start would be to just do a quick summary of the episode so we're all aware of what happens. A transporter accident creates out of new Neelix and Tuvok and an orchid, creates a new organism which refers to itself as Tuvix. In the course of the episode, it is revealed that there is a way to reverse the accident, and the ethical dilemma is then raised: who has the stronger right to life, Tuvix or Tuvok and Neelix? The outcome of this episode, Captain Janeway corrects the accident, recreates Tuvok and Neelix, killing Tuvix, essentially. This has created a huge amount of fan discourse over the years, as there's a massive argument in the Trekkie community over what she did. So this is our attempt to kind of join that conversation. So do we want to go through our points? You go through yours, I'll go through mine, and then we'll respond after.
Well, I created a short opening statement for my client.
Ooh, doing it properly. Okay, go ahead.
Again, this will be brief. My client, Tuvix, was alive. He was a unique, sentient life form, an individual distinct from both Neelix and Tuvok. He took on the best qualities of both of them and had already begun to endear himself to the crew, showing a clear ability to fulfill both roles of Tuvok and Neelix's statuses. He begged for his life, and Janeway murdered him.
Wow. Okay. I don't have an opening statement, but let me try and come up with one here quickly. Captain Janeway, in this situation, has been greeted with a circumstance which previous events that have occurred to other Starfleet officers justify her response as the correct and acceptable response. And not only that, but the fan discourse, the vitriol that she gets for her actions is driven not by ethics, but simple bias towards the attractiveness of Tuvix as a character.
Interesting.
Since you went first with your opening statement, the floor is yours.
I propose this situation. What if all three had died when Janeway tried to separate them? There was no guarantee that she would successfully be able to separate the two of them from Tuvix. And she still risked all three of their lives in order to bring back Tuvok and Neelix. Again, there was no guarantee that what she was doing would actually work. So the argument that two lives are more important than one, I feel are null and void, when she in fact risked all three of them.
Would you like to carry on, or are we going
No, I'm back and forth.
Okay, so my opening 2 points. Previous events in Starfleet history give her actions validity. In 2266, Captain Kirk is separated into two distinct entities in a transporter accident. One, primarily his negative traits, and one, primarily his positive traits. Both entities are conscious and sentient. Dr. McCoy and Engineer Scott are able to figure out a correction to this situation and recombine the two entities into a singular Captain Kirk. In this situation, the two entities created by the transporter are distinct and different and were killed in order to recreate the original Captain Kirk, but there is no kickback against Dr. McCoy for correcting the accident. Number 2, connected to this, transformations in Star Trek have always been reversed. In 2372, an attempt to break the Warp 10 barrier, Tom Paris and Janeway are transformed into some form of large salamander as an unexpected side effect.
We don't talk about that.
As an unexpected side effect of breaking the Warp 10 barrier. Technically, these two represented new forms of life, but both individuals had their transformations reversed to restore the individuals to their human selves. Something similar happens in the TNG episode Genesis, where the crew of the Enterprise D are accidentally de-evolved into more primitive forms of life, including amphibians and proto-Klingons. Again, the crew are restored regardless of the new life that is created. Therefore, these 3 incidents demonstrate that when accidents or unexpected events result in new forms of life, Starfleet officers have a tendency to reverse these incidents irrespective of scientific opportunities provided.
Your Honor, I would like to request that the salamander bit of evidence be revoked from this conversation, as Janeway did not have a conscious choice to this situation. She was quite literally kidnapped against her will and then forcibly altered to the point of becoming a weird salamander creature. And I feel does not apply to this situation.
Well, Captain Kirk, however, his incident very much does apply to this situation.
And in which case I would say Dr. McCoy broke his oath. Do no harm. You do not kill in order to heal, which is exactly what he did in order to revert Captain Kirk back to his original self and killing 2 unique individuals in the process. As we see in the Voyager episode, the Doctor refuses to take part in the unmerging of Tuvix. He, as I said, reiterates, I can do no harm, and makes it very clear that this situation is killing a life form in order to, quote unquote, restore 2 others. And in the case of Captain Kirk, it's even worse. You're killing 2 life forms to restore 1.
There is no fan discourse stating that McCoy's actions in this situation were wrong because of the attractiveness bias, which I will go into discuss later on.
I'm not here to discuss the fan discourse. The fans can believe whatever they would like to. I am here to defend my client post-mortem.
In regards to what you said, yes, arguably Captain Janeway is technically risking 3 lives. However, we have no idea that Tuvix and his weird physiology was going to be capable of long-term sustainability. By leaving Tuvix alive and not even attempting to recover Tuvok and Neelix, not only are you condemning them to death, but if Tuvix's physiology eventually breaks down because of God knows what complications in this situation, then you are still risking their lives by leaving him intact.
So are you saying that disabled individuals that have low life expectancies are not worthy of life and living the lives that they have potential to do so?
No, but what I'm saying is that even Captain Janeway accepts that there has never been an accident like this before, and therefore they have no way of knowing what the future status of Tuvix is going to be a year down the line, 5 years down the line. They had the opportunity to restore Neelix and Tuvok at that moment without risking Tuvix dying 5 years down the line, killing all 3, essentially.
I'll give you one point, that Janeway was faced with a very difficult decision. I won't deny that. However, Tuvok and Neelix and every crew member knows the risk of entering that transporter. They all know it could potentially be their final moments. There have been numerous transporter incidents throughout history that have proven it is not always a safe method of travel. And if these two understand that risk, just as every other crew member does, then the combining of the two to turn them into Tuvix should not be a problem. They should understand that, again, these could be my final moments.
I think that's an entirely straw man argument, personally.
Oh.
Bear with me one moment. I need to look something up. Geordie LaForge in 2369 states that in the last 10 years of transporter activity, there have been 2 or 3 accidents. And in that time, millions of people have been transported safely without incident. What your argument is stating here is that a couple of minor incidents over a course of a 10-year period means this technology is completely unsafe. Technically,
Absolutely
every
not.
time they
That
go
is not
into
what I'm
space, they are risking their lives if they go into space. Are you saying that every time you use a transporter, you should expect to turn into some horrible gelatinous blob formed from all of the crew that are currently on it?
No, but I'm glad you brought up the fact that they are on a dangerous mission in the first place. They all know the risks involved. They all know any day, any moment, and any second on these voyages through space could be their last. They all signed up for it. They all agreed to it.
Okay. However, they are also fully understanding that should something occur, that all possible manner of response will be made to protect their lives.
However, they didn't make any choice to do so. Janeway herself even tells 7 of 9 at one point, I don't remember the year, forgive me, it is wrong to sacrifice another being to save our own lives. And 7 counters that she has been willing to sacrifice herself many times, but Janeway explains that that was her choice, and that in the case of this particular incident, this creature does not have a choice. And in this particular incident with Tuvok and Neelix, neither of them are capable of making a choice to be reverted back to the way they were. The only person capable of making a choice is Tuvix, who made his choice clear that he wants to live.
Thank you for bringing us to the topic of choices, because that's my next point. Tuvok and Neelix were not given capacity to advocate for themselves. While Tuvix was capable of advocating for his own life and its continuation, neither Neelix nor Tuvok were given that capacity. It was clear Tuvix was a new entity created from the two. As he stated, I have the memories of both men, but a single consciousness. He was not capable of speaking for them. The only person that could advocate for them was, in this case, Captain Janeway. And as the ship's captain, she is required to show a duty of care towards the members of her crew. Tuvok and Neelix were not dead, they were inherently trapped and being held hostage by Tuvix. And connected to this point is then who has the right to the body. In the Stargate episode, Pretense, a trial is held to determine, in the case of 2 entities claiming control of a single body, which of the 2 entities has a stronger claim to that body, which they both require to live. It is determined in that episode that the original owner of the body has the greater right to its control. If we apply both those points, Janeway has the right to advocate for Tuvok and Neelix's rights to control, and what happens to their body that currently makes up Tuvix's body. They have the greater right to their bodies than Tuvix does.
Your Honor, I think this argument is entirely inappropriate. Both of the consciousness of Tuvok and Neelix were combined into one. So it is not as if one is being held hostage to the other, or 2 being held hostage to Tuvix. They each are Tuvix. Similarly, would you say that Dax is some sort of abomination that needs to be corrected because it is a melding of consciousness?
She is a specific alien life form that is capable of melding with another consciousness to form a new, unique, blended individual. In this case, neither Vulcan nor Talaxian are aliens that blend together to form new consciousnesses.
Except we have seen
separated.
in Discovery that a human can equally blend consciousness with one of these symbiotes.
Your Honor, do we really have to bring up Discovery and its rather lackluster
Discovery
tendency to...
is canon and does count for this argument, Your Honor.
They play around with canon so much. Let's be fair, they have a very loose grasp of Star Trek canon.
Just because he does not want to accept that humans are capable of this level of melding as well, does not mean it is not true, Your Honor.
So do Tuvok and Neelix have absolutely no right to choose what happens to their lives?
In this case, they both are one. Tuvix is Tuvok and Neelix, and Tuvix wanted to live. Does Tuvok's life not matter just as much? He was denied a chance to start a life, find his own partner, and explore what life has to offer for himself.
He was an accident.
And thank you for saying that. Accidental does not mean lesser. Is an accidental pregnancy somehow lesser than a planned one? Of course it's not. So why would his accidental forming of life be considered less than Tuvok or Neelix's?
Do Tuvok and Neelix not have the expectation that if something were to happen to them, that something would be done to protect their lives?
And in this case, their lives are not over. They have simply been molded into one.
To create a new life form with a distinct personality of its own, and therefore they are not living through another entity. This is not a situation like the Tok'ra in Stargate, where you have two distinct personalities in one body, both of whom are capable of communicating. They have been turned into a new consciousness. Neither are given the opportunity to advocate for their own separate existences.
I'll be honest, I don't really have much more.
My big point here, then, there is a clear bias issue amongst the fanbase. The fanbase support of Tuvix stems from an inherent attractiveness bias. An example of this inherent bias towards attractiveness can be seen in modern conservation. While cute-looking, attractive animals like panda and koala experience a lot of positive conservation work, animals like insects and amphibians who are suffering worse in decline are rarely seen because they are less attractive to us. This can be seen in Tuvix. Tuvix himself is civil and able to do both cooking and tactical work better than Tuvok or Neelix, and therefore is more attractive to the average person than the somewhat annoying Neelix or the over-logical and cold Tuvok. Unlike the already mentioned incident with Kirk, where the situation created an obvious bad person, and therefore it was okay to kill them, Tuvix only created a good person. I believe the fanbase response would have been very different if Tuvix had been shown to be evil or a bad character, or if the creation of Tuvix had created medical problems. To quote Bernd Schneider, owner of the Trek website X*Scientia, imagine that Tuvix had been a wholly different person than in the actual episode, and had inherited only the worst from Tuvok and Neelix. It was an accident after all. Such a Tuvix could have been mentally unstable or seriously handicapped, or he could have been a complete asshole and not at all the charming person that everybody likes. Would Voyager's crew care as much for such an alternative Tuvix, or wouldn't they rather want Tuvok and Neelix back at all costs? Would fans still accuse Janeway of murder had she killed an unfavourable Tuvix?
Your Honor, I would like to say Tuvix is not at all attractive. I don't agree with this argument. He was ugly as hell.
Attractive in personality and traits.
I know. And while that argument stands, Tuvix, again, my final point I would like to make is that Tuvix was his own person. A person who quite literally was begging for a chance to live. to the point where the actual doctor of the ship would not take part in the separation of Tuvix because he knew he was going to be killing someone who wanted to live. Tuvix never got a chance to have his own agency as a person because of certain circumstances around him.
You could argue in that case that Tuvok and Neelix also were not given agency because of the accident that occurred to them.
The person who deserves that agency is the person who can actually speak, who can voice their opinion, and that person was silenced by Janeway.
The original owners of the bodies are the ones that should have the rights to their existence. Tuvix being created was unfortunate in all manner of circumstances, but fundamentally his creation was an accident, not expected, and the only way of correcting that accident was to essentially kill him. But you could argue that all Janeway actually did was just finish the transporter sequence. You could argue that both Tuvok and Neelix hadn't finished the transporter sequence and they were just combined into one individual. Janeway finished the transporter sequence by returning them to the bodies that they were before they started the beam up process. It's also pretty apparent if you watch Lower Decks and they had this happen, that at a set point they were perfectly willing to do this as well to other Tuvixes that had been created by accident, and they used the claim of, well, they're a sentient blob. It's better for everyone if we just reverse it.
In that case, clear physical deformities and health issues were present, which were not present in Tuvix. I was going to say, I think we've both made our points. I would like to, before we get into what our actual opinions are, leave the floor to the audience now. Please leave comments with your own opinions on how you think the Tuvok situation was handled. How could it have been handled better or worse? Do you think Janeway is a murderer for what she did? Do you think she was just being a good captain? What do you all think?
And also, what do you make of our arguments and evidence to that we have in support of our arguments? It'd be cool to know which one you think out of me and Michael has the more convincing side of it.
I mean, I think now we can say what our actual opinions are. I think you definitely had the better argument because you were basically saying what I agree with. I think Janeway did the right thing, personally.
Yeah,
I
both
think 100%
agree
that she did the right thing.
Or
not even necessarily the right thing. There are no right answers in this scenario, but I think she made the best of a bad situation.
This was something I wanted to mention in this section. Like, the end of the episode makes it really clear that Janeway herself is not happy about what she's had to do. I think the episode needed a few minutes more, like an ending conversation to happen between Janeway, Tuvok, and Neelix to provide their perspectives of what Janeway has done in order to just sort of end the episode properly, because basically she kills Tuvix and that's the end of the episode. It kind of stops quite sharply, and I think there just needed to be a little conversation at the end between those three, just to kind of round out the episode a little bit better.
I mean, it would have been quite interesting to find out if they were each sentient and aware of what was going on and also didn't want to be unmerged as a sort of counter to what Janeway was proposing through the whole episode. But unfortunately, we don't get that, and Tuvix is never brought up again in the show, so it is dropped then and there as soon as she makes that decision. But I do still hold, even though I think Janeway did make the best choice she could have, I do think killing someone who is quite literally begging for their life is a pretty, I don't want to say abhorrent, but it is a pretty dark thing to do. And
it is.
I do not envy her position in that situation.
I mean, this would have helped your case. Starfleet Regulation 2, so the one directly after the Prime Directive. Starfleet officers will not willingly kill intelligent life.
Well, I mean, I sort of brought that up with the Doctor. Again, do no harm. And the Doctor made it clear in that episode that he would not take part in this unmerging because it is, in his opinion, it is killing a life form and it is morally wrong, which I think there is a strong argument for.
I feel like if in this situation both Tuvok and Neelix had been combined with the flower and on the transporter pad you just had a really nice looking weird flower instead of a talking, walking individual, the discourse around this event would be entirely different.
That's
and
true.
I think it falls fundamentally into some natural biases that we have as individuals, as humans, about what is considered important to protect and what we connect to.
True, and I think ultimately the needs of the many do outweigh the needs of the few in this situation. Tuvok and Neelix each have their own partners. Tuvok has an entire family. They each have their own friends and relationships that are unique to each individual, which were all completely gone with the merging of Tuvix. And I think by that alone, Tuvix should have been unmerged back into the two original people.
I think what this episode does, though, is really interesting because I think this episode demonstrates what Star Trek does when it's written quite well, which is present a very complex ethical dilemma which gets everybody talking. The episode in itself is pretty successful because of how much fan-based conversation occurs around it. I think this episode does a far better job at discussing the complicated ethical situation it has more than, say, Strange New Worlds is What is Starfleet, because unlike that episode, this one doesn't present one side as a superior choice to the other, nor attempts to villainize the actions of one particular character. It presents a difficult situation, presents us with the way our Starfleet character handled it, and then lets us discuss the ramifications of that.
Yeah, 100%.
This is what Star Trek does really, really well. But yeah, I think in that situation, Janeway does the only thing, picks the less evil of the two options. I also think every other Starfleet captain would do the same thing.
I think so too.
Captain Archer sacrifices Sim to bring Trip back to life, essentially. So I think it's pretty clear where he stands on it. I think Captain Picard, there would perhaps be more ethical toing and froing, but I think in the end he would also do it. I think Sisko, if this had happened during the Dominion War with two of his officers, I think he would have done it perfectly fine, and he would have
he would not have hesitated. I think he would have been like, yeah, no, we're not doing this.
I don't think he would have hesitated. Captain Burnham,
I think she would also do the same thing as Janeway in this case, because basically for all the arguments we've presented already, I think she would come to the same conclusion. I think like Picard, she would probably go a little back and forth on it and really consider the agency of Tuvix in particular, but I do think Captain Burnham would eventually make the decision to split them back into the original people as well.
And I think Captain Pike would also probably have made that choice. I think that sort of justifies Captain Janeway's response in that situation as well. I do find it very interesting that when discussing this episode, the original series episode where Kirk is split into his evil and good halves is not mentioned very often, because I feel that that particular episode is kind of pretty much the ultimate defense of Janeway's actions. Like, this has happened before, and they reversed it, and it's fine.
I feel like, yes, it happened before, but it was such an obvious good versus bad situation that it doesn't quite apply to this scenario, where Tuvix himself was not good or bad. He was a complex individual, same as Tuvok and Neelix. But with Kirk, it was very black and white. It was, you have pure good, pure bad. We need to meld him back into one whole person again. And it's just I think a pretty weak episode overall. So it doesn't quite work with either argument, in my opinion, when it comes to this situation.
I mean, I think fundamentally the other thing we have to accept about this episode is this is the problem with non-serialized stories. Inevitably, Tuvok and Neelix were going to return. Tuvix was never going to stay. They're the two characters that were going to be part of Star Trek Voyager as the show went on. So inevitably it was going to be reversed. And in that way, I mean, Star Trek has done through its time all sorts of mental things that have to be wrapped up by the end of the show in order to keep on with the way that it's going. I mean, in one particular episode, Deep Space Nine loses an entire docking pylon, but the next episode it's fixed. The problem with classic Star Trek is many of these things just get magically fixed off screen for the next episode, and that's one of its flaws.
And one of the virtues of some new Trek. For all the issues I do have with a lot of newer Star Trek, serialized storytelling has allowed them to really explore the consequences of certain actions, which I think is definitely a good thing, and something that legacy Star Trek could have really benefited from.
Yeah, and I think if a similar situation to this had occurred in a newer Star Trek, there would be perhaps more of a chance of the new character staying around for a while and a greater ethical conversation being made. But in an episode where you're restricted to 45 minutes and you have to wrap it all up, obviously it's all going to get fixed by the end. So in that way, whether Janeway is guilty of murder or not is superfluous because the episode requires it to be that way.
Very true.
Although that's a very meta argument.
Still, it's a valid one.
But yeah, we both think Janeway would have done the right thing, and we would have done the same thing in that case.
But again, I'm curious to hear what all of you might do in this situation, or what arguments you might make for one or the other.
I'm really curious to sort of get into this in the discussion. Obviously, do try to keep comments, nice. Let's not be attacking anyone for particular ideas. You want to make it clear neither me nor Michael are advocating for the willing murder of crew members that may or may not be on your starship. We're merely taking this ethical situation as it comes.
100%. Let's all be civil with our discussions, as
indeed.
In the true nature of Star Trek. Let's all be adults about this.
And also, I think there's quite a few Star Trek related episodes that we could kind of have this style with. So I think me and Michael might do a few more of these in the future.
I would love to do some Prime Directive ones, because that we do have differing opinions on, that I feel like I could make a very strong argument for the opposing side on.
Well, maybe our next one can be then a for and against the Prime Directive, then, in that case.
That could be fun.
Do like the video if you enjoyed hearing our little debate, and subscribe if you want to hear more videos from us at One Trek Mind. But until then, it is goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.